All right, the next topic in section 4 that we're going to discuss is the law of detachment. All right, the law of detachment is if your conditional statement is true where both your hypothesis and your conclusion are true. So both of them need to be true. So the conditional needs to be true and the hypothesis and conclusion have to be true. All right, if both of those are true, then if your hypothesis occurs, you know guaranteed that your conclusion is going to happen next. So if I make the statement, if Mr. Spellman wears a green shirt, then there is a pop quiz. And every time I've worn a green shirt, there's a pop quiz. All right, so it's a true conditional where both, every time I wear a green shirt, there's a pop quiz. And then tomorrow class comes and you see me wearing a green shirt, the conclusion that you're going to jump to is that, well, there's going to be a pop quiz. Because if the conditional is true where both the hypothesis and the conclusion are true, and then the hypothesis occurs, then we know that the conclusion is going to follow. All right, so when you're answering a question like this, what you want to do is you want to first identify and make sure that both the hypothesis and conclusion are true, and then you want to identify the hypothesis of the given conditional. And then if the second statement matches the original hypothesis, then you can make the valid conclusion that the conclusion is going to occur. All right, so now we're going to do an example with this. All right, so now using the law of detachment, we want to make a conclusion. So you're given a statement, if a student gets an A on a final exam, so if a student gets an A on a final exam, then the student will pass the course. All right, and then we're going to tell you that that is a true conditional. So both the hypothesis and the conclusion are true. All right, then you're told, well, Felicia got an A on her history final exam. What conclusion can you make? You can then conclude that the student, or Felicia, will pass her history class or history course. All right, so when you're given a true hypothesis and a true conclusion, if a student gets an A on our final exam, then the student will pass the course. So you're given a true conditional where both the hypothesis and the conclusion are true. And then you're told that the hypothesis occurs. So Felicia got an A on her history exam. The hypothesis occurred. Then the conclusion that you can make is that true conclusion of the conditional. So since she got an A on her history final exam, we know that she will pass her history course. All right, and then the last thing that we're going to talk about in this section is the law of syllogism.